evening in terms of those severe storms that will be possible as we get later on throughout today. But taking a look outside right now, we have really just a few showers off towards our west, but mainly some cloudy skies. We don't have to worry about much for much of this morning, but as we get later on into the day, that's when things are really going to start to heat up. Taking a look a little bit out at a wider view off towards our west in parts of Oklahoma, western Oklahoma, we can already see we have some severe thunderstorm warnings already beginning to pop up. All the way along this line is some pretty heavy rain beginning to move in, and that's where that cold front is, right along this line north to south. As we move later on throughout today, we can really expect that this line is just going to continue to creep our way. The storm is moving and the system is moving relatively quickly. So as it moves our way into the next few hours or so, we're going to see more of those storms begin to pop up closer to the Arkansas-Oklahoma border and getting into northwest Arkansas and into the river valley. But the main threat for a lot of the worst of the storms will be farther south of our area, parts of Texas, parts of southeastern Oklahoma, and into southwestern Arkansas. But we still have that threat for some heavy rain, some strong winds, and some tornadoes as we move later on throughout today. That low pressure system right now is sitting over the panhandle of Texas, and it'll slowly be moving our way as we move later on throughout the rest of today. Ahead of that is where we're going to see a lot of those severe storms begin to pop up. Like I mentioned, parts of the Dallas area moving northeastward is going to be where that biggest threat, potentially to have some tornadoes and the strong winds, but we can't rule out as this front begins to move through our area of 5 country, also seeing some of those storms. But taking a look at Futurecast, as we move later on throughout the morning, we're going to see some light showers initially to start out this system moving through. As you get later on towards the beginning of the afternoon, we could see a little bit heavier down pockets and potentially some cells begin to pop up. Southern parts of the river valley getting into northwest Arkansas. That main band will begin to move in as we get in later on into the afternoon. Around 4 o'clock is when some heavier, some stormier air is going to begin to move into the area. And as we get into around 5, 6, 7 o'clock, that's when this main line of storms that'll consist of mainly those strong winds and heavy rain will begin to move into the area. But most of the tornado threat will be out ahead of this line. We could see a few tornadoes embedded within the line that could have enough rotation to make it to the ground. But a lot of the tornado threat will be a little bit earlier in the afternoon. This time of the afternoon, getting into 5, 6 o'clock, and then after sunset into 7 o'clock will mainly be the threat for those strong winds and potentially some heavy rain. But this is where the severe zones are right now. Like I mentioned, the southern parts of Arkansas, southeastern Oklahoma, and into northeastern Texas. Those are the areas that are at the biggest concern for those tornado threats later on for today. But all of Arkansas is under some sort of threat as we move forward here to see some potentially some severe weather. But for northwestern Arkansas and the river valley, those main threats are going to be that gusty winds along that front. But parts of the river valley south of I-40 are still in that level 3 zone. There won't be quite as likely to see a tornado as some parts a little farther south, but we cannot rule out the possibility for a tornado warning system. Not necessarily a tornado hit the ground, but we could see some tornado warnings still popping up because there's still enough rotation in the atmosphere, even if we do have just that line of storms move through, not your classic supercell. There isn't enough rotation in the atmosphere alone to cause some spur-ups of those tornadoes, at least a signature on radar to show up. But breaking down what we have right now, we're still a good 7, 8 hours away before we see some of those stronger storms begin to move in. What ingredients do we have in the atmosphere this morning that are causing those the chance for some storms later today? Well, we have temperatures in the 60s and 70s, well above average for this time of the year, and that's causing a lot of those ingredients for what we need to see those storms later on today. So 69 in Fayetteville right now, 72 in Fort Smith, well above average. And you can see we have these winds coming out of the south, and it's bringing a lot of warm air, but also a lot of moisture into the atmosphere above 5 country, giving a lot of instability for those storms to thrive. And taking a look at those dew points, really high right now, especially for November. You don't really see dew points normally this high, and that means generally when you do have dew points this high, it's conducive for storm development. 67 for a dew point in Fort Smith, 61 in Fayetteville, 68 in Springdale. Anywhere above the mid-50s is good for thunderstorm development. It's warm enough to seize potentially some tornadoes, some supercells to form, and we're going to see that later on into this afternoon because it is going to be warm enough. Taking a look at the storm energy potential, this is something that meteorologists call CAPE, but in general, it just means how well the atmosphere is for the instable for those storms to just really grow in height and cause some severe weather. Off to our west, that's where the highest storm energy will be later on this afternoon as we track into when that line of storms will be moving into the area, maybe later on around 6, 7 o'clock tonight. really going to see that energy is going to decline, which is good for us, which means that storm, as it's making its way through 5 countries, is really going to start lowering in its potential, might not be quite as severe, won't be able to strengthen enough to cause maybe some of those tornadoes, but we still could expect some strong winds along this line. But this is a good sign, as later on throughout today, we're really going to see things quiet down just a bit compared if we were, say, 100 miles off to the west, where things are going to be a little bit more severe later on this afternoon. But we could still see some really severe weather as we move later on throughout the rest of this afternoon. But taking a look at rainfall, it's not going to be our main threat for today, but we could still pick up upwards of an inch. Some areas localized could see 2 inches of rain, really depending on when these pockets of downpours begin to move in. But as we move later on throughout today, really just some quick moving showers moving through, but dumping a lot of rain because it's going to be very heavy coming down. But taking a final look at Futurecast, what you need to remember as we get going here over the next 7 to 8 hours as those storms move in. They're going to start moving in early afternoon, initially light showers, mainly just pockets of rain moving into the area. But as we get later on to around 3, 4 o'clock, that's when we're going to see some of these heavier cells begin to make their way into 5 countries. And some of these could be tornadic in nature, so you want to make sure that you are aware of the radar and the risk as you're heading outside. And also, as we get later on into the evening, that line of storms will be giving us the chance for some gusty winds as we move into the later half of this evening and into this afternoon. Stephen Elmore and Zach Scott will be live later on today in the afternoon and also all evening to be tracking this storm. So you want to keep an eye on your 5 News and on the weather app to make sure that you know where these storms are.